Good afternoon again, everyone. Well, let me share. I'm on a Zoom now. Can you give me a half hour? Okay, let's start again. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is well and continues to be well. And the Mitzvah Hashem, we're making progress. We'll make progress and get out of this. This week's Parsha, the Torah tells us the Jewish people leave Egypt and they encounter problems. Problems of the fact that you no longer are dependent upon someone else to take care of your problems. One of the disadvantages of being a servant is the fact that you're not independent. So if you're not independent, somebody else has to take care of you or doesn't take care of you. But here, now they have to take care of themselves. So they went for 3 days in the desert, and they had no source of water. Now, our bodies are basically water. We human beings are 2/3 water. And water is the basic ingredient of life. Without water, no life can exist. So if they're 3 days without water, whatever water they had in their canteens, etc., they are already consumed. And they're in the middle of a desert, and there's no water. And they come to an oasis. They came to Morah. But they could not drink the waters of Morah, because those waters were bitter. Al Kain Korah Shma Morah. Therefore, the name of the oasis was Morah. So here you have Morah 3 times in one pasuk, in one verse. So the Meforshim point out that was to illustrate how bitter the waters were. It isn't that waters were slightly bitter. It was 3 times the bitterness. Now, the Meforshim here look at the words in the Torah. It says, so the simple explanation, as I had used a minute ago, is that the waters were bitter. So the Meforshim say that that's not necessary, because it already says that they couldn't drink the waters of Morah, because it's Morah, it's bitter. So therefore, the understanding Kimorim Haim is a deep psychological understanding here. It's not only that the waters were bitter, the Jewish people were bitter. We all know from our own personal lives and experiences that if, God forbid, somebody's in a bad mood, or if one is dealing with terrible problems, so you can set the table with the finest dishes and crystal, and you can prepare the most exquisite meal, gourmet. But if the person is in a bad mood, the food doesn't taste good. So when it says Kimorim Haim, that they were bitter, so the Torah is telling us why the water was so bitter. It's not just that the water was bitter, they were bitter. And if they were bitter, So therefore, Al Kain Korah Shma Mora, the whole experience is bitter. The whole experience is now seen as one of bitterness, of all sorts of negative vibes, so to speak. So the Meforshim ask, what were the Jewish people bitter about? They just went out from Mitzrayim. They just saw Paro and his army drowned in Yam Suf. It's raining bread from heaven. What are they bitter about? Well, the simple explanation is all of that is true, but if you're thirsty and you don't have water, so then you're bitter. But again, the Meforshim search for a more analytical answer. And they pointed out a number of things that made them bitter. Firstly, look how many Jews died in Egypt. We had that in our time. Those that survived the Holocaust. But they were broken people because of the fact of the people who did not survive the Holocaust. Whether they were their close relatives or not. The generation that is freed is never really freed from the trauma of servitude and slavery. And especially here, where the Torah tells us, Chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael meretz Mitzrayim, that only a certain percentage went out of Egypt. But a percentage died in Egypt, remained in Egypt, never tasted freedom. So that certainly is a source of bitterness. It's a source of disappointment. Second idea that is mentioned by the Meforshim is that they were bitter because of the fact that they realized that they were beholden to God and to Moshe. And in the minds of many of them, as we will see throughout the entire 40 years in the desert. And in fact, Ribono Shalom told them that. You've only traded masters for another master. Before Paro and the Mitzrim were your masters, now Kaviyachol Ribono Shalom is going to be your master. Ki avodayim. They're my slaves, my servants. So to a certain extent, they felt that they would have a more difficult master than they had before, because the Lord is certainly more exacting. And therefore, that was the source of bitterness to them. And a third idea, which is really a trenchant idea, is that they realized that they were free. And that poses challenges, enormous challenges. And any time that they ran into the problems that freedom automatically engenders, so they always said, "Nitno rosh v'no shuva Mitzrayim." Let's turn around and go back to Egypt. It's too much for us. In the beginning of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the Western world, So there was a standoff, a nuclear standoff. And the Soviet Union, in effect, threatened the West that if you're not willing to adopt our system, if you're not willing to become communist, we'll blow you off the face of the earth. That was really what Khrushchev tried in 1960 in the Cuban crisis, 63. So there was a famous British philosopher, Bertrand Russell, who was no friend of the Jews, to put it mildly, and who was always a left-wing socialist communist. So he coined the phrase, better red than dead. It's better for us to be red, to adopt the communist way, to give in, than dead. We're going to get killed. They're going to drop the atom bomb on us. It was a prevalent notion amongst the Jews as well when they left Egypt. That's what Nitna Rosh V'Noshuva Mitzrayim means. Let's go back to Egypt. It's better red than dead. Better to go back to Egypt than Minusenu Bamidbor. We're going to die here in the desert. So all of this combined led them to be a bitter people. When Moshe says, Am Kshei Oref, so we translate it as a stubborn people, stiff-necked people. But the Mefarshim say there's a nuance here. It's a bitter people. It's a people that can never know satisfaction. The people that is eternally displaced, that cannot find themselves in a situation where they, so to speak, are satisfied, have security. That's not how they exist. And that's the problem of Am Kshei Oref. So when they said it, Mora ki morim heim, that it's bitter, they are bitter. If they're bitter, the Rabboni Shalom says, I have no water for them. There is no water that will wash away their bitterness. They have to accomplish that themselves. They have to be able to rise above it. And therefore, the Torah says, Shom Nisohu. There they were tested. Shom Som Lo Chok Mishpat. There came rules, justice. The whole challenge appeared there. That's the preface to the entire 40 years in the desert. The entire 40 years is to get the bitterness out of them. To see themselves as a Mamlechas Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, the greatness that they are, the mission that they have, the reason the Lord took them from Egypt. Worship God and to be the holy people. It's the only way to overcome the bitterness. And therefore, that's an important lesson. That's an important lesson for us too. You know, here, there's politics and everything. People are not satisfied. It's never going to be good. You know, you get the injection that makes you immune, but there's always some scientist that says that you're never going to be immune. So instead of being cheerful over the 95 or 98% of immunity, oh no, you know, 1% isn't going to be immune. All depends how you look at life, my friends. Imori Main. They're a bitter people. Everything will be bitter. And if they are able to overcome that, then they'll appreciate many things that happen to us. So I want to thank you all for listening. Have a very good rest of the day and a good evening. And Emirtz Hashem will talk again tomorrow on this wonderful parsha of Beshalach. Kol Tuv Selah.